My name is Jon Luxton. I'm the Specialist Advisor to Jane Hutt. Jane sends her regards to this meeting and her support. This is something that's very close to her heart, and she's very committed to the whole equality agenda. So I hope I can do her justice, but who knows. And,
you will, John.
Thank you very much. And I thought your speech was very, very, very good, and delivered with a voice that I cannot possibly hope to manage. So I'm going to give up on that one. Okay. So Welsh Government is doing an awful lot of work across its organisations to prepare Wales for Brexit. The Welsh Government is preparing, as you said, it's got a website to assist that, and it has a page dedicated to the issues around disability. So that was something that we put in place straight away. It's something that we've seen as very important. We also recognise that that Brexit-driven disruption to services is likely to disproportionately impact upon disabled people. And when we say the word likely, I mean, you know, it is exactly it. Some of our language sometimes could be not direct enough. It will do. It's inevitable. And this risk needs consideration and action. That's something we're trying to put into place. And I welcome the important work Disability Wales is doing with Dr. Charles Whitmore and the WCVA Brexit Forum to assess the potential impact of Brexit on disabled people, as well as the Brexit Manifesto produced by Disability Rights UK. We are keen to develop and to use this work to shape our work as a government. So thank you for your work so far. We know it's continuing. And as a result of the European Transition Fund, I am extremely pleased that Disability Wales are delivering capacity building, enhancing Brexit support programme for disabled people's organisations across Wales. This is fantastic. And of course, this is a two-way thing. Because it's not simply experts going to groups, going to people. It's about that sharing of information, that developing of information across the piece. And having that reflected back into Welsh Government will certainly strengthen any work or all the work that we carry out in this area. So thank you for that. I look forward to seeing the results as they're coming through as we are. I also understand there's 2 more regional events coming up in North Wales.
Yes, and West Wales.
And West Wales, North Wales and West Wales. Come on. Oh, great. So I'm sure if you've got the dates and you're free, then we're popping along. Okay. The UK's exit from the European Union continues to bring immense uncertainty, not least the relationship of the equality and human rights. Decades of EU membership have produced a legacy of benefits covering many aspects of daily life in Wales, many aspects. I'm going to take you back to 1995. Di quite rightly reflected on that legislation and some of the issues of its weakness and some of the ways that the European Union actually improved it. And there are many ways it did. So I remember when it was passed, I felt like, right, I'm going to go and get on a bus now. And I go to the bus stop and wait for an accessible bus to suddenly turn up. Of course, according to the legislation, that was going to happen until 2017. But if it wasn't for the fact that the European Bus and Coach Directive, which they started writing in 1996, straight afterwards, the DDA, and that was when that was passed, of course, not a perfect directive, because there was various issues around the definition of what accessible is. And Rhian and I and others at the time, we were quite critical of it, but it did actually make changes to the DDA that made it better. And of course, Di also pointed out that under the original Disability Discrimination Act, the employment section, organisations with less than 20 employees. Now, that is the vast majority of employers were not covered by the legislation, which many people quite rightly thought was a disgrace when it first came through. And the European Directive for Equal Treatment in Employment and Occupations 2000 put pay to that. It said, no, this isn't equitable, that will not be allowed to stand. And that was changed for the better, obviously. Also, we had other situations, like the 2004 regulation on the coordination of social security system, which I think you touched on, really. I have an ex-partner living in Spain who's deeply worried about this, because she relies on her care package there. Now, what's she going to do? So it's not just the older people, it's also people who are disabled who've decided to actually emigrate. So for her, it's a real living situation where she might be forced back to the UK, a place she hasn't lived in for 19 years. So these are very serious issues. And because of the Court, another one, because of the Court of the European Court of Justice, it became unlawful in 2008 to discriminate against employees because of a relationship with a disabled person. That, again, was European law directing and shaping UK law and saying, no, this isn't acceptable. And, of course, I think it's been touched on probably 3 or 4 times today, the likelihood that we will not be bound by the directive, the proposed European Accessibility Act. Now, for many of us, that would be a serious benefit to actually be involved in that, but, of course, the likelihood is that we won't be. The last contributions that I was dealing with settled status issues was something that I've been actually involved with, because I have a Polish PA who was like really considering what she was going to do because she feels unwelcome. So we helped to get settled status, which was not the easiest of processes, but we achieved it, and her son. But now, because of how she feels about the UK, the pressures, the underlying consideration of her as a lesser person because of her nationality, she's now moving back to Poland in July, even though she's got settled status. Now, I'm saying that because within this individual example contains a universal problem. It appears that around 70,000 social care people from Europe will be returning, and there's going to be a very large gap in this employment. So we're looking at, by 2026, a shortfall of around 380,000 people. Now, what does this mean? This is a direct threat to the independence of disabled people, a direct threat, because many disabled people rely on the employment of personal assistants. Now, of course, when you have a hole that big, then there's going to be fallout. There's going to be victims. There are going to be people having to have forced care from directions they really don't want. We touched on the blue badge parking scheme. I love my blue badge. I love it. It's my third favorite thing. Wheelchair car, blue badge. It's a fantastic thing. Now, losing that in Europe would be a problem. Not that I've always kept to the regulations. I once got booked for parking. I thought it was a good spot right outside the Colosseum, but they didn't seem to think so. But my blue badge stopped me getting clamped. So that was a good thing. Okay. So yes. So, and of course, the European, we've also got the health insurance card that we've talked about. My bones are a little bit on the snappy side. So it's always a regular occurrence, the odd broken bone. And I remember one of them, I actually broke a bone in France once. And because of that card, I went to the hospital. I had an x-ray, the plaster cast was put in, signed a few forms, got back, came home. It was completely simple, absolutely. Now, when I go to countries where that doesn't exist, I have to pay quite a hefty insurance premium. And I have to go through all kinds of difficulties regarding, they have to get the actual insurance assessors to see whether they'll cover me and things like that. On occasions, they've refused. So, and the cost is always significantly higher. So that again, this will be hitting people's pockets disproportionately. Okay, so there's a real fear there's a real concern that that this backdrop of European legislation will be rolled back. Not only could the UK fall behind EU improvements, but it will now be possible to roll back the rights in the UK if the next government chose to do so. So if we look at the Equality Act, it won't be amended by Brexit, but its interpretation could change greatly. UK courts should normally continue to interpret the Act in line with European Court decisions after December the 31st, but that might not be the case. The government could pass regulations to make it very, very different. So we could have the same law on the statute books, but with a different background and a different backdrop, which could result in interpretations being very different to what we see now. And we've all talked, I think most of the speakers have talked about in some way around the European Social Charter, and the Charter for Fundamental Rights of the European Union 2000. These pieces of the legislation were crucial to us having legislation which was backed by principles of equality and human rights. Without that legislation there, the Equality Act might be backed by Tory-driven regulations which may not be in line with what's right for us. The Charter is a living instrument, meaning that it's not static, so that when new changes take place, when new developments or new understandings or case law happen, then that is directly pushed into our legislation, because the Charter makes the EU uphold basic rights. Losing the Charter would have a significant gap in our substantive rights, because it includes rights which do not have a direct equivalent in any UK law. So this is not that we'll be standing still by agreeing these things. We're actually taking away legislation which doesn't exist in UK law. So again, that's going to have an impact. And of course, we'll be losing the Charter's principles, which can be used to interpret other pieces of legislation. For example, there's a case upholding restrictions on tobacco labelling relied on the Charter's principle of high level of human health protection. So that principle could be used by people in order to try and push through changes or outlaw certain practices. So when that's not there, how are you going to do that? Also, we will create the unnecessary legal uncertainties and confusions, because whereas right now the Equality Act and other pieces of the legislation had a backdrop of European case law and et cetera, that could go. So then how on earth does existing UK legislation get enacted? So these are serious problems. Okay, also, it's another thing. Sorry, my notes are all over the place. Which often comes when you hear really good contributions. You think, how can I incorporate that? How can I change what I've just written? Did I write that right? So it's a compliment to all of you. This is where I'm looking at my notes. Okay, yes. So when we look at all these obvious possibilities, what was the response of government? The response was not to even carry out an impact assessment. See, so we can all look at these things. We all know what the issues are. But of course, the government didn't want to put pen to paper and say, you know, this is what we must be dealing with. And we've also had a bit of almost skepticism, I think, at times today, when we talked about what will be happening. Now, of course, none of us know exactly what will be happening until after December the 31st, 2020. But even then. But we know the direction of travel. And we know the ideology and the ideas of the people who were involved in UK central government. We know that already. I mean, I think Di Lloyd pointed out very clearly some of the issues around the characters involved. And we also know from Britannia Unchained in 2012, it was the book that was written by Priti Patel, Dominic Raab, and others who were members of the government. Young new MPs, which was like a manifesto of their belief in how the country should develop. And in that book, we can see some of their ideas rolling through with actions now. I mean, for instance, we had words like the British are amongst the worst idlers in the world. We work amongst the lowest hours retained. We retire early, and our productivity is poor. These are the kind of statements we say it's not inducive to an increase in human rights. It's inducive, or it's a pointer towards a lowering of human rights. It also says we should stop indulging in relevant debates about sharing the pie between manufacturing and servicing, the North and the South, and men and women. So again, all our work around equal pay and all this kind of work that we want equality within employment, they're not too favour of that. And lastly, if we think this was just ancient history, when Priti Patel was employment minister, she said, if we could halve the burden of EU social and employment legislation, we could deliver a 4.3 billion boost to our economy. So again, so we can see the ideology that is driving Brexit and how the deal will be shaped and formed. Oh, sorry. Okay, so let's get to some of the good news, what we can do. All right, the Welsh approach to promoting safeguarding equality and justice and human rights. Welsh government has been very clear regarding the UK withdrawal, that it should not in any way lead to a dilution of human rights protection or indeed any other social, environmental or employment protection. The Welsh Government is very clear on that. The Welsh Government is also committed to safeguarding those benefits in Wales. We vigorously oppose any attempt to cut corners, create worse conditions as we leave the EU. In particular, we will monitor closely the impact of withdrawal from the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. In securing Wales's future, Welsh Government document, we made it clear that in leaving the EU, we'll be vigilant and insist on that protections and standards which benefit our citizens and our well-being in the society will not be eroded. So the Welsh Government is very clear about its points of principles, and principles I'm sure we share with Plaid Cymru and other people who are on the panel today, because these are universal things that cross party boundaries. So, it was also mentioned this morning about Section 81 of the Government of Wales Act. Yes, absolutely. This requires us to really focus our work and see our work through the European Convention on Human Rights, to reflect that in our activities, and that is crucial. So, as it's also been talked about the incorporating of human rights treaties to strengthen equality and human rights within our country, and we are very pleased to say that Simon Hoffman from Swansea University is working on this now, along with other organisations, so we can have a real good understanding of this. How do we incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People? This could be a move forward in order so that we can backfill the philosophical and practical and basis to which our legislation sits. Okay, so, and again, we talked about another response to this being the public sector duty, crucial, because as we know, the public sector duty will disproportionately impact disabled people, because disabled people are disproportionately within poverty and require this kind of assistance. So, again, so we're very pleased to be pushing that forward. And lastly, cheer, lastly, I hold this thing in my hand. Don't worry, I'm not Chamberlain. This is, equality won't be inequality won't in our time. So that's the word. Thank you very much. So we have a document. You've probably all seen this document already, and you've seen that it's full of very good ideas. Action on disability, rights to independent living. And if you haven't, and if you need a paper copy, I have some Welsh Government colleagues at the back. Would you like to put your hands up? Yeah, see our colleagues. So they will be happy to take your details and supply you with documents that you might need to know about. And also to read and criticise. It's important that you are a critical friend in all of this work. And I won't go through it all, but as we can see, because when we're looking to mitigate Brexit, we're not simply dealing with it head on. We have to look at the issues around employment, social mobility, housing, violence against women, evidence-based policy making, healthcare and rights within healthcare, providing advice, education, transport, tourism. There's loads of areas which we must be directly working with to ensure that barriers, whether they're attitudinal, discrimination, structural or environmental, are lowered within the services that we create and programs that we support. So I've taken up enough of your time now. So thank you, everyone.